There are three terms that medical anthropologists tease out and use not interchangeably. Three terms that in everyday English we usually use interchangeably, but that in medical anthropology anthropologists really separate out and try to recognize that there are three different terms. And these are disease, illness, and sickness. So yes, in everyday language we use those terms interchangeably, but in medical anthropology each one of those has a distinctly different meaning. Disease is defined as abnormalities in the structure or function of organs or organ system, pathological states, whether or not they are culturally recognized. In other words, when we're talking about disease, we're very specifically and very narrowly focused on the biological body. Disease happens to the individual, right? It happens to an anatomical being, and it's abnormalities on this biological level. So they're abnormalities in the structure or function of organs or the organ system, pathological states, whether or not they're recognized culturally. This is the arena of biomedicine, and let me just point out or emphasize this point. This is the sole domain of biomedicine. That's not a critique of biomedicine. It's simply an explanation that this is where biomedicine focuses, right? It focuses on the biological body, and its arena is disease. This is a little bit of a weird thing because under this definition, you might say, well, where does a broken bone fit? And we would say that's disease, even though that feels a little weird because we don't usually describe a broken bone as disease. But when we're talking about an abnormality on a physiological level, a broken bone would fit into that terminology. The second term is illness. Illness is defined as a person's perception and experiences of certain socially disvalued states, including but not limited to disease. A person's perceptions and experiences of certain socially disvalued states, which could include disease, but it's not limited to disease. And what is important about this is that the socially disvalued states, right? So there are illness experiences that are based in disease. So you break a bone, it hurts, you feel really crummy, you can't go do the things that you normally like doing. So the broken bone would be the disease, and the crummy feeling that occurs from it would be the illness. And in this case, it's illness that occurs, that emerges from disease. But medical anthropologists recognize that that is not the only source of illness, that there are illnesses that emerge from not physiological reasons. So there could be socially disvalued states that medical anthropologists would recognize as illness, even if biomedicine doesn't recognize as disease. Again, this is not a critique of either. It's simply explaining that these are two different domains of knowledge, medicine and medical anthropology, that look at the illness experience from different perspectives, and therefore they notice different things. So when we use the terminology of illness and sickness and the socially disvalued state, these are good clues that what we're talking about are what anthropology would acknowledge as illness. Homesickness, having a broken heart. These terms are ones that we use in everyday language, and in fact in everyday discourse we acknowledge those as real experiences, even if they're not rooted in a biological abnormality. We say a broken heart, but we don't literally believe that our heart is broken. We simply use it as a metaphorical term to describe a socially disvalued state. We call it homesickness, even though we don't believe that there's a biological pathology that creates that sickness. We recognize that it's a social experience. So anthropologists readily acknowledge that whole array of socially disvalued states, those that emerge from disease and those that don't. Those emerge from other sources as all being illness. Now, what's interesting here and what I really want to focus in on is that because biomedicine only very narrowly focuses on disease, there are ways that people have very difficult social experiences that biomedicine finds hard to treat. A really good example of that would be PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an experience, an illness experience, we'd say, that's not rooted in a biological pathology. There's not an abnormality that's happening on a physiological level. It's something where the environment, the social structures that we're in might cause. So it's either it's encountering a traumatic experience, either so rape, for example, might cause PTSD, being in war, being in a deeply impoverished community. There's all kinds of sources, but none of them start in the body. They all start in a social context, and they would create what medical anthropologists would call an illness, a socially disvalued state. And because biomedicine really wants to help people who have those experiences, and at the same time biomedicine is focused only on disease, the way biomedicine works it out so that they can help is that they bring it into the domain of disease. So yes, you were raped, and now you have this chemical imbalance in your brain, and oh, chemical imbalance, I totally know what to do with that. Let me treat that. And so what biomedicine does when it doesn't have the language or tools to talk about illnesses that don't start from disease is it brings it into the language of disease. Socially disvalued states, illness. The third term, sickness, is a term that is in some ways can be thought of as an umbrella term for illness and sickness. So here's the definition. Sickness is the process through which worrisome behavioral and biological signs, particularly ones originating in disease, are given socially recognizable meaning, that is, symptoms and socially significant outcomes. Sickness is the process for socializing disease and illness. And it's that last part of the definition that I find most useful if you're unfamiliar with these terms. So let me repeat it again. Sickness is the process for socializing disease and illness, because what it does is it helps us understand that all disvalued states don't have meaning until society explains to us what it is that they mean. Ow, this hurts, or oh, I feel bad. These are experiences that we have, and they kind of float out in the world, and the moment that we have either a medical practitioner or someone in our community who kind of can help us put that experience into sense, right? It puts it into sense, it puts it into a cultural context, that's when it becomes sickness. So we might say that sickness is any time you take an illness or disease, or both, experience, and give it a name. Oh, you are feeling pain in your arm, you have a broken arm. Oh, you are crying incessantly, it's because you're broken-hearted. And so broken-hearted, or you have a broken tibia, are when we give something a name, meaning we put it into a cultural sense. Another way of noting when something becomes a sickness is all the sentence that comes after the word because. Oh, you're feeling this way because a bacteria entered into your leg and is causing swelling. Or, oh, you are feeling this way because an ill-wishing spirit is trying to attack you and put the bacteria in your leg, and therefore now you're sensing swelling. The outcome, the leg, looks the same in both contexts, but those are two different sicknesses. In one, the sickness is rooted in what we would call disease, so there's a bacteria entering in the body, and that's the cause of the disease. It's because the bacteria is in your body. In the other context, the cause of the disease is an ill-willing spirit that put that bacteria into your body. So sickness is the socialization of illness and disease.